for the head of state, for the monarch, and overseeing, as she has done with 14, now 15 prime ministers, that transition of power, sometimes between parties, and as we've seen in the last few years, within a party, but nevertheless a smooth transition, passing from Boris Johnson. And remember, just 3 days ago, Her Majesty The Queen was on the throne and Boris Johnson was in number 10 Downing Street. Here we are on Thursday evening. We have King Charles III and Prime Minister Liz Truss. This is truly an extraordinary moment in the history of the United Kingdom. Not least because we know not what we face over the next few months, something that Liz Truss was addressing today on the economic and political side, but we're not thinking about that this evening. Of course we're not. We're thinking about what this means individually, what it means to each and every one of us, what of course it means to a family, a tight-knit family, to so many people, perhaps a slightly odd, a slightly strange, a slightly dysfunctional family in some cases, but there is no other family like the royal family. Of course there isn't. We've chosen to have such a family. They serve us. We look at them, and my goodness me, we mourn with them now. We're looking at them now. We're drinking in this scene with the flag, no, not fluttering anymore, but lying at half-mast above Buckingham Palace, telling us that Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed. She, of course, passed away, and so many people commenting upon this, at her beloved Balmoral Palace. Balmoral in Scotland, of course, where she spent so many summers, indeed all her summers, ever since she was a young girl. It was where her beloved mother and father first took her from the day she was born, and she followed on that tradition with her own family. So many months, so many years spent there. And talking of Scotland, we've got reaction now from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. This was her speaking a few moments ago.
Like everyone across Scotland, the United Kingdom, indeed the world, I feel a deep sense of sadness on the death of Her Majesty the Queen. On behalf of the people of Scotland, I offer my sincere and heartfelt condolences to the King, the Queen Consort, and to the entire royal family. There will be many opportunities in the coming days to reflect fully on the Queen's extraordinary life and service. For more than 70 years, Queen Elizabeth has been the great constant in our national life. She has inspired us, on occasion comforted us, and always personified values we hold dear. Throughout her reign, she performed her duties with exceptional wisdom, dedication and fidelity. Scotland loved, respected and admired her. And by all accounts, Her Majesty was rarely happier than when she was here in Scotland at her beloved Balmoral, a fact I have been privileged to observe personally. I hope it will be a source of comfort to her family that she spent her final days in a place that she loved so much. This is a moment of acute loss and profound sadness. It is also a moment of enormous significance. The passing of Queen Elizabeth marks the end of an era. Our nation is in mourning. My heart and my thoughts, and I know those of people across Scotland, are with the royal family at this deeply sad moment.
Well, fulsome tribute there to Queen Elizabeth, whose death has been announced today, from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Words echoed, I'm sure, by the thousands of people who are gathering here this evening in central London, outside Buckingham Palace, to have their own thoughts and to share their own tributes about the Queen's death. Nicola Sturgeon referring there to the Scottish people's love of the Queen and their appreciation of her dedication, her wisdom and her fidelity, and of course referring to the fact that she passed in a place she loved so much. That is, of course, at Balmoral, where my colleague Mark Austin is now. Mark.
Yes, thanks very much, Dermot. And you know, it's interesting that I was just listening in my ear, Dermot, to those cheers that rang out outside Buckingham Palace. 3 cheers, I think you said, and I heard them in my ear, and it was so incredibly moving because we're going to see a lot of formality in the coming days. We're going to see a lot of sadness, a lot of ceremony, but you know, it's going to be little moments like that that you witnessed down there outside Buckingham Palace, those cheers. It's going to be little moments like that, I think, that will make people realise how much this Queen meant to them. And you know, in stark contrast to that cheering outside Buckingham Palace, it is just very quiet here. And there were, as I said before, some people here who came along when they heard that the Queen was not well. They came along and wanted to wish her well. And then the announcement came, and it just became very, very quiet. The police slowly moved them along because the roads have to be cleared now. They have to close, not least because Prince Harry is on his way from Aberdeen Airport to Balmoral and is expected any time now. It's about an hour and 10 minutes from Aberdeen Airport. He landed about that time ago, so any minute now we could see Prince Harry arrive. He'll be joining his brother. He'll be also joining his father, who's now King Charles, and they will be together this evening in a place where the statement from Buckingham Palace said that the monarch died peacefully this afternoon, and it is very fitting because she was always peaceful here, as I was saying earlier. And it is strange to think that it was just, what is it, Thursday, it was Tuesday, that she was seeing Liz Truss here and appointing her 15th Prime Minister. I'm just glancing to see if this, I think it is certainly a convoy of some sort arriving here now, and it could well be, I think. Very difficult to tell. It is dark, as you can see, and they were moving at some speed, but certainly Prince Harry is due here any time. And I was saying it's extraordinary to think that it was just Tuesday that the Queen was on her feet. She was smiling. We all saw the photograph. She looked frail, but she was greeting Liz Truss, and she was greeting Boris Johnson before that, and was fulfilling that role that she felt was so important and something that she so wanted to do, clearly. And I guess the other thought is that if there was anywhere in the world that she would like to have passed her last days, then Balmoral would be that place. As we wait for Prince Harry, James Matthews is right alongside me here in the rain and the darkness and the sadness of Balmoral. And as we were saying, it is a place that meant just so much.
It did, Mark. That was Prince Harry that was part of that 3-vehicle convoy, now joining the rest of the family who are in Balmoral. His father, Prince Charles, or now King Charles III, he was here earlier on today, joined, as we saw, by Prince William, Edward and Sophie, and Prince Andrew and Prince Harry, making up the family group that have arrived over the course of the day. And, you know, you speak about the comfort of this place for the family, and that's what it is now, isn't it? I mean, there are no crowds here. It's dark, it's raining, there are media here, but that doesn't mean to say this isn't a community that feels a deep sense of grief out with the gates of Balmoral. I spoke a few minutes ago to the Reverend Kenneth Mackenzie. Now, he is a minister from Crathie Kirk across the road who knew the Queen very well, and he was with her until just before she died. And I'll tell you what he said to me. He spoke about a common sense of loss that we all share. And he said hers was a long life, a life shaped by faith infused with grace and characterized by selfless service. I think that's a feeling that is shared in this community, certainly, and much further afield. This is a community in which she was a familiar figure. She had a different background from people who live in Aberdeenshire, but they shared a very strong sense, or they bestowed upon her a very strong sense of belonging. She was seen around the place. She was out and about. In the final few weeks, she was walking on the estate, walking the corgis.
You know, it was interesting. I flew up here this afternoon and I sat next to a guy from just outside Aberdeen. He said, I know why you're on your way. And he said the people of Scotland love the Queen because the Queen loved Scotland. And that is true.
Yeah. As articulated the last time she addressed the Scottish Parliament, famously in October 2021, speaking about herself and her husband, Prince Philip. And, you know, that passion and that love for the place was often interpreted as political enthusiasm for the United Kingdom and Scotland's place in it. It was just at the end of the street where, during the referendum, she was heard to say, I hope Scottish voters will think very carefully about their future, which was interpreted widely as an endorsement of the Union at a key political time. You know, not confirmed.
Well, it's interesting, we just heard from Dr. Sturgeon, who said she was a much admired, respected and loved monarch.
Yeah, a monarch who transcended the bitterness and the division of the political playground that we live with in this country, north of the border, in particular when it comes to constitutional politics. A woman admired by all, a role model, a woman who bestowed unity on those around her, and one, of course, that we can grieve as a period of national mourning begins between now and the funeral, a structured period of national mourning.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, James, for the moment, thank you very much. And just to bring you up to date from here in Balmoral, Dermot, Prince Harry has, we're told, just arrived. We saw his vehicles, I think you saw his vehicles just a few moments ago. So Prince Harry has joined his brother and the other members of the family at Balmoral. Back to you, Dermot.
Well, it is 8 o'clock and this is Sky News, where Buckingham Palace has announced that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. In a statement earlier this evening, the palace said this. It's a short statement. It said that the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. That was a statement posted on the gates of the Royal Palaces at about 6:30 this evening. Well, Charles, who became king on the death of his mother, had this to say: the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He continued, we mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realm, and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. King Charles continued by saying this: during this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. And it is that respect and deep affection that we are witnessing right here, right now, outside Buckingham Palace. Thousands of people have gathered here during the course of the last 3 or 4 hours. First, initially, awaiting any news. They hope for good news. Perhaps we all were preparing ourselves for the worst after the earlier statement about the deterioration in the Queen's health at Balmoral and the fact that so many members of the royal family were travelling there to be with her, as it turned out, in her final hours. And then since that announcement, it's a simple announcement, as I read out there to you. It's a very short announcement. And the convention is the way that these formal announcements are made from the royal family, whether it be the joyous news of a birth or a marriage, or the saddest news of the passing of a monarch. It is the posting of that statement on the gates of a palace, in this case the palace, the centre of the palace is the centre of London, Buckingham Palace, which so many people now are respectfully queuing up to have a look at, to take a picture of, why not, with their mobile phones. And every now and again, spontaneously, people not knowing, I suppose, how to react at this point, just a ripple of respectful applause breaks out. I think there's maybe a small one starting there, just someone in the crowd starts and others pick it up. Just a way of showing their appreciation, their tribute to the life of Her Majesty. And every now and again a cheer goes up, and that then ripples around the crowd. But people just walking around, taking in the scene, but taking in the facts, and we're going to all take a long time to absorb this. As has been said, and will be much said over the next few days, the monarch that not many of us did not know, did not think we knew, because she defined our lives, like her or not, for the vast majority of the citizens of the United Kingdom. She has always been our monarch. Very few people around now who remember her father, and of course even fewer who remember the days before she was born. It really is the end of an era, the changing of the guard, the changing of the monarch, and that's, of course, under convention, under the Constitution, happened seamlessly and instantaneously. Charles having to deal with both the sadness, the awfulness, expected or not, of the passing of his mother. But it's also now his formal duties, which he has assumed instantly, to take over as king of the realm, as he put it, king of the Commonwealth, King Charles III, the name that we now know he will assume, and that Camilla, his wife, will be the Queen Consort. We also know from the statement that they, of course, are remaining in Balmoral with the members of the family who have gathered there to share those dreadful moments as the Queen passed. They are remaining in Balmoral this evening. Then they will return, as is part of their duty, as is part of the King's duty. They will return to London tomorrow, and a very formal process begins. A process which perhaps I could discuss now with our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills. And this then, Rhiannon, the formal process of accession.
And I think as the crowds there outside of Buckingham Palace, and no doubt people up and down the country and around the world, come to terms with what I think is going to be an immense sense of shock, especially when it was only on Tuesday that we saw Queen Elizabeth II standing up and appointing her 15th Prime Minister. I think what may come as a surprise to many is that the process, the handover from one sovereign to a next, literally would have happened at the moment that she took her last breath. We have a hereditary monarchy, and now we have a new monarch. We have King Charles III, and what is going to unfold over the coming days will be a sense that the pendulum will swing between mourning her death, but also the country welcoming the new monarch. And part of that will be the Accession Council, where we will see, I think, ritual, pageantry, ancient customs and these ceremonial events that haven't been performed for over 7 decades, as we formally see him proclaimed as king. Now, that will actually happen at St James's Palace in the coming days, and his succession will also be proclaimed in all 4 parts of the United Kingdom. Now, we know for certain that he is going to take the title of King Charles III, and some people might think, well, of course he would. But actually, a new sovereign is able to choose their name, so we were waiting for that confirmation. Because he could have used some of his other names, which are Philip, Arthur or George. But no, we have King Charles III. He also takes on a number of other roles from Queen Elizabeth II, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Supreme Governor of the Church of England, Duke of Lancaster, so inheriting the portfolio of land and property set aside to fund the monarch, and also he will now be head of the Commonwealth. And I think Alistair Bruce, our events commentator, was making an interesting point earlier, that now he has to take up all those matters of state that his mother was dealing with, had dealt with on a day-to-day basis. However, what is abundantly clear is you will also have a family who are in the most profound period of mourning. And in many ways, it is lovely to know that they are all at the moment gathered at Balmoral, a place where they have shared so many wonderful times together. It really was a place that they could all come to with the Queen. They could relax away from the prying eyes of the rest of the world. Balmoral has a real sense of remoteness, of seclusion. There's a wildness to it, and we know that they love their time in the countryside. And the statement from King Charles III, I think, in a way summed up how the family are feeling, as he talked about the death of his beloved mother and described it as a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He went on to say, "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know that her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." But the final paragraph, I think, was very important for him, and important for showing that this is going to be a difficult moment for him, a moment of real mixed emotions. But he said that during this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. And Dermot, I think that's something that you are currently witnessing. Even though the rain is coming down outside of Buckingham Palace, the crowd's still gathering to pay their respects.
Too true, Rhiannon. Thank you very much indeed for that. Yeah, it's coming down in stair rods now, but it's not thinning the crowd at all. The brolly's going up, but everyone's staying here, taking it in. Also taking it in is a man who's very upset, I can see. Dick Griffin is with me here. We'll continue to look at those scenes. Dick is a former Royal Protection Officer. Served the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh for what, 27 years in total. Dick, just give me your thoughts.
The Queen, like Prince Philip, was part of my life for so long, and I've been lucky enough to share so many special moments with them, royal tours, private moments, and lots of lovely special times at Balmoral. And in fact, this weather reminds me of Balmoral Castle. We had some great rainstorms up there. But I've just been thinking, while I've been listening to you run your programme, thinking of some of the special moments I had with the Queen and how considerate she was. And one of the stories that sums the Queen up is, she said to me in the car one day, "For the last 9 months, all you've spoken to me about is how excited you were about becoming a grandfather for the first time." And she said, you know your grandson's been born, you haven't even bothered bringing him to introduce me to him. So I arranged with my daughter to bring my grandson Joshua to a location where the Queen was staying privately, so the Queen could have a little cuddle with my grandson. And that just shows, you know, how special she is, thinking of everybody.
And your daughter presumably went along as well.
Holly was amazed, yes.
Yeah, what a special moment for them. How old's Joshua now, then?
He's just turned 17 because he's just passed the driving test and I had to give him a car.
Well, we can backdate that, but a special memory for him. I hope there were photographs allowed to be taken then?
Yes. No, they weren't, sorry. No. I mean, the Queen would have
been told about it.
But it would have spoiled the moment, quite frankly, if we did it.
Tell me some more memories about Her Majesty, because, you know, I mean, I was privileged enough to meet her a couple of times formally, but on those formal occasions, you know, she knew how to carry out her duties. She knew how to do the grip and grin, shake your hands, move on. But you saw a different side than so many of us.
She was such a special lady. I mean, I used to run marathons for charity, for cancer charities. And when I ran my 100th marathon, my running club, Blackheath Harriers, put on a little party to celebrate. And the president at the time wrote to various people to get letters read out. And he had the cheek to write to Buckingham Palace, asking Her Majesty would send a letter. And the private secretary showed it to her, expecting her not to agree. Of course, Philip and I would love to do it. And when the letter arrived, it was the usual platitudes you'd expect. But the line I liked was, "Aren't you lucky to have such a wonderful employer who allows you so much time off to take part in these events?" And she used to sponsor me as well. And if I was, very often a lady in waiting would ask me to do it for one of their pet charities. And then the Queen would always sponsor me privately. And it was just wonderful.
Rí ìwọ tí wàá wá sí orí péèjì mi tí wàá máa sọ nonsense pé ṣé mo ń present ni àbí mo fẹ́ gbé news kíun. I think you wọ́n ṣe bí ẹ wo lọ́pọlọ ní mímọ̀ pọ́pọlọ áyán ló wà lórí yín. Mo rò bí èmi ni mo ní page tí mo ń lò, mi ò yá page èèyàn lò. Mi ò dẹ̀ rò bóyá mo lo page yín. Dẹ̀ jẹ́ kí orí yín kó máa pé nígbà mi tó jẹ́ pé tí ẹlòmíì bá ń hùwà máa hùwà bí ẹni tọ́pọlọ rẹ̀ ti lọ, bí ẹni tọ́pọlọ rẹ̀ ti jùn, bí ẹni tọ́pọlọ rẹ̀ ti pọ̀, bí ẹni tó ti forí gbá ilẹ̀, bí ẹni tó rí ẹ̀ ti burú. Béèyàn ò bá fẹ́ sọ̀rọ̀, ẹ máa fẹ́ kẹ́nìyẹn ẹ sá máa provoke ẹnìyẹn to the extent pé ẹnìyẹn sá máa fi sọ̀rọ̀ sá. Oníṣèmi ń present ojú mi ni àbí mò ń present news. Ó dàbí pé bóyá kẹ́ lọ gbọ́ ọmọ ìyá yín kó mọ wá bá yín sọ̀rọ̀ lójoojúmọ́, kẹ́ wá wo bó ṣe rí, tàbí kí wọ́n fúnra ẹ̀ bọ́ síta. Bóyá ìyàwó ẹ̀ bọ́kọ ẹ̀dẹ̀ ló máa gbé jù síta tó máa wá bá yín sọ̀rọ̀. Tẹ́ bá máa hùwà bí ẹni tí ò ní common sense. Tán bá dẹ̀ sọ̀rọ̀ ẹ máa sọ̀rọ̀ sí ènìyàn pé ènìyàn ò mọ bọ́ ṣe máa ń sọ̀rọ̀. Ẹjọ́ ẹ jẹ́ kó rí yín ó pé o. Mi rí anybody wá sórí page mi ti torí anybody open. Ẹni tó bá tí ìgbésí tí mo ṣe ń ṣe tí kò bá tẹ́ lọ́rùn, àǹfààní wà láti lè lọ wo ẹni tẹ́ bá tẹ́ lọ́rùn. So understand? Ẹ wo ẹni tẹ́ bá tẹ́ lọ́rùn. Ẹni tẹ́ fẹ́ máa gbọ́ ohùn rẹ̀ ẹ lọ wò ó. Kò ní problem pẹ̀lú gbogbo reskebo gen. But for you to come to my page and insulting me here, I won't allow you that, okay? I won't allow you. Kẹ́ wo bó ṣe máa easy tó. Ẹni tó yẹ pé aláìmoore ló pọ̀ jù nínú yín. Pé kéèyàn máa jìyà kó máa ṣe wàhálà fún yín gan. Bí pé nìyẹn ò ṣe anything náà ni. Mi ò dẹ̀rù bóyá mo wá síbí báyìí láti wá present fún yín.
We should take comfort.
Ẹjọ́ jẹ́ kó rí ó pé o, ẹ ṣe normal o.
Better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Her Majesty is the warrior queen. She has done it. She's been there. And Her Majesty dressed the nation. It's the empathy. We're all in this together, but it's going to be okay.
My grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages.
Her Christmas broadcast every year was her chance to send a personal message.
It's no surprise that families so often treasure their Christmas routines.
Because behind the formality was an utterly devoted wife and mother.
Prince Andrew, 5 last February, probably feels quite senior now that he has a baby brother.
The family is very close together, and we do enjoy spending time. And she's always made time all the way through her life. And yes, there have been those particular moments of the year when that very much comes first.
When we were very young, obviously, it was harder for her to have so much time. And we were obviously living elsewhere as well, so we were never really all together in the same place. But whenever we had the family moments and we met up, she'd be very keen on watching what the children were up to. And I think there were moments when she loved the noise and running around the house. It kind of brought the house to life, and it kind of made the real family atmosphere.
I think that'll be strong enough.
Try the one up there.
We see if this is strong enough to... Get off. Get off. I want it.
While she was head of state, Philip was head of the family and a huge support.
Come around this side. Nasty feeling, isn't it? Another brother.
They were a couple with a different relationship than many people have. But he learnt to live with that. It's difficult to be a monarch with the degree of responsibility that you have without a very good partnership to back you up.
When there were tough moments, if he was around, it was hugely important. You could see them working a crowd or working a walkabout.
You watch it, they'll stop you.
It wasn't planned, it was instinct. They both had the same metabolic clock, I think.
In 2021, she said goodbye to her beloved husband and dedicated consort.
We have been inspired by his unwavering loyalty to our Queen.
What you see is courage, but also a complete lack of self-pity. She feels grief, but as she said on one occasion, it's not about me.
In a less deferential world, they did weather more difficult times, especially in the 1990s, as her children got divorced and a fire wrecked Windsor Castle.
In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
In 1997, Princess Diana died in a car crash. It was a low point for the royal family, as the crowds criticised them for staying in Scotland.
Take care of the boys. Take care of the boys, Mum.
That's what we've been doing.
Sorry?
That's what we've been doing.
I know you did.
The Queen eventually decided to speak.
I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys.
The Queen's life has been a continual process of evaluation, re-evaluation, shaping how you keep in touch with a world that's changing very fast. But she was always doing that.
In recent years, the Queen led the monarchy through more turmoil, with the Sussexes leaving and Prince Andrew facing sex abuse allegations. She rarely showed emotion in public. Privately, she was known for her genuine warmth and kindness.
One of my predecessors said, you never come out of your morning session with the Queen feeling worse than when you went in.
She was always worried about you and how you were.
It must be quite difficult to do.
You know, and how your family were.
You stick all these things in.
We were up shooting one day up in Balmoral, and the weather changed in the afternoon. So I took my raincoat, wrapped it round, I gave her my scarf and my gloves. And as I walked away, I cheekily took my flat shooting hat off and put it on top of her headscarf. 3 weeks later, she called me into her office, and she'd had this photograph developed and put in a beautiful frame for me. And she said, I thought you'd like to keep this as a souvenir of that very funny afternoon we had up in the hills of Scotland.
One paw. That's it.
She was never happier than when she was with her dogs and watching her horses.
Oh, she does relax with racing folk. Yes, definitely.
Has won for Her Majesty the Queen!
When she gets to racing folk, you can see the shoulders drop. You can see it. Ah, somebody I know, somebody I've got something in common with. And she does maybe spend a little bit longer with them.
I do remember that suddenly there was a huge fight going on amongst a number of corgis. She waded in and she got bitten in the process, but she sorted it out.
Just sometimes we would see a glimpse of her sense of humour.
Careful what you wish for.
Oh, really? Please.
Boom.
As she shared the screen with some of Britain's other biggest stars. James Bond at the 2012 Olympics.
The two figures disappeared out of a helicopter. Harry, in complete incredulity, just shouted out, "Go Granny."
And Paddington Bear for her Platinum Jubilee.
I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here.
Oh.
For later.
Thank you for everything.
That's very kind.
As the Queen grew older, the whole country would come together to celebrate her milestone moments. She would go on to become Britain's longest reigning monarch.
Inevitably, a long life can pass by many milestones. My own is no exception.
And the first to mark a Platinum Jubilee. Her family increasingly expected to step in to support her. The Queen's remarkable reign and the stability it brought, helping to secure the future of the monarchy as her family continued to grow. Throughout her life, honouring to the end the pledge she made at just 21.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Can't help but bring a smile to your face. Some wonderful memories there of Queen Elizabeth, of Princess Elizabeth there by our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills. And it's significant, isn't it, that so many of those scenes, so many of those memories, so many of those parts of history took place right here behind me at Buckingham Palace, all the way back, as we saw in some of the wonderful footage, some of the archive that Rhiannon showed us, all the way back 80 years and more to Princess Elizabeth and the start of that life of service and devotion. And it was just simple service to a nation at war back in the 1940s when she, amongst other things, became a mechanic as part of her war service. And talking about those moments in history, this, of course, is another one of the biggest, again, taking place outside Buckingham Palace. As I've referred to before, the crowds here simply huge, and we can't see in the dark just how far they extend. And every now and again, choruses of "Long Live the King," a reference to the way our Constitution works. We now have King Charles III. That has been confirmed. King Charles III is on the throne. And spontaneous rounds of the national anthem, and people can't quite put King in there. It's God Save Our Gracious Queen. I think they don't want to let go yet. I think it hasn't sunk in yet. I don't think it can sink in for any of us yet, given how long Her Majesty reigned on that throne in this her platinum jubilee year, 70 years. And looking back at some of those archive pictures, as we call them, some of those just so notable moments, and there are so many more, it is astonishing to look back at the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, when Queen Elizabeth was at an age even then when she could quite legitimately have retired if she'd been in any other profession or occupation. But of course, she wasn't in a profession or an occupation. It's one of the most extraordinary situations any human being can find themselves in. A hereditary monarchy, as Rhiannon pointed out. It was by a quirk of fate, a quirk of history, that she actually came to the throne. She was never expecting it because her father wasn't expecting it. But there, and nor she expecting to come to the throne so young, back in 1952. But come to the throne she did, and dedicated herself then relentlessly to 70 years of non-stop service, day in, day out, minute in, minute out, right up to this week when I was standing in a similarly rainy London outside Downing Street, witnessing Her Majesty the Queen see the departure of one Prime Minister, her 14th Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and asking her 15th, Liz Truss, to form a government, a process that she'd carried out so many times. But we are told, we heard just as recently as Tuesday how Her Majesty didn't just insist on carrying out those formalities. She couldn't travel to London. Of course, that had always been done in Buckingham Palace. She couldn't travel to London. She insisted that it happen at Balmoral. She had to do it at Balmoral because of the difficulties that she was having with her mobility. But carry out that duty she would, which has ensured those smooth transitions throughout so many years of political turmoil. Well, now we are witnessing what happens then when it comes to the head of state level, and there is no turmoil. This is a well-oiled machine. King Charles III has taken over, and we now mourn and celebrate the life of Queen Elizabeth II, the second Elizabethan age. Well, it's not just here in the United Kingdom where we are absorbing this momentous news. Of course, one of our closest allies, the special relationship, you know what I'm talking about, a nation, of course, which would have many reasons for not perhaps celebrating and appreciating our royal family. It is, of course, the United States. I'm joined now by our US correspondent, Mark Stone. And Mark, just tell us about the tributes there, in particular, first of all, from President Biden.
Well, goodness me, Dermot, they do appreciate her reign. They do recognise what an extraordinary woman she was here in the United States. It was the Queen herself who said to President H.W. Bush a few decades ago, "No wonder I cannot feel a stranger here," she said. "The British have never felt America to be a foreign land. Here we feel comfortable and among friends." And you mentioned the special relationship. Well, that special relationship was brought up by President Biden in his statement, which was released just a short time ago. I'll read a bit of it to you. He says, "Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was more than a monarch. She defined an era. Queen Elizabeth II was a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy, who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our special relationship." He goes on to say, all told, she met 14 American presidents. She helped Americans commemorate both the anniversary of the founding of Jamestown and the bicentennial of our independence. And she stood in solidarity with the United States during our darkest days after 9/11, when she poignantly reminded us that grief is the price we pay for love. And I think that quote, "Grief is the price we pay for love," will be something that many people across the world are feeling today. The president also in his statement said that she charmed us with her wit, She moved us with her kindness and generosity, generously shared us her wisdom. That was a personal reflection at the end there by President Biden, who of course met the Queen very, very recently and will deliver a televised statement a little later on tonight. He's also expected to visit the British Embassy here in Washington, D.C. At some point later, where he will sign a book of condolence and I'm sure lay flowers at what I'm told is a growing area of flowers where people are paying their respects here in the US Capitol.
And Mark, just quickly, just that point I alluded to, of course, there was the American War of Independence. It used to be one of the colonies. Why is the United States now 200 and more odd years on? Why is the United States so besotted with the royal family?
The Queen of England, as they call her. They always reference that. And, you know, just now as I came into the White House, the Secret Service security guards said to us, oh, we've just heard the news. Our condolences to you at my son's school. American parents were reflecting on the news as well. It's something that has touched the entire nation. You know, I don't have a simple answer for the closeness with which Americans hold the British royal family, but so they do in every state of this land. And as the President pointed out, she met 13 of the last 14 presidents. The only US president she didn't meet, Lyndon Johnson, but all the others, going back to Truman, to Eisenhower, to Kennedy, she knew them all, she met them all. And the families of those presidents are reflecting on the loss, and those presidents who are still alive have all released very personal and very touching statements.
Mark Stone in Washington, where we see the Stars and Stripes, as I say, had far fewer stars on it when it left the Commonwealth of Great Britain at half-mast. Fulsome tribute there by President Biden, by Joe Biden, to the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. Let me just take you through some more of the tributes we've had this evening. Of course, first and foremost, from the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, who only 2 days ago was installed as the Queen's 15th Prime Minister. Liz Truss, a sombre Liz Truss, as we all are, appeared outside Downing Street to voice for the nation just how devastated we all are individually and collectively. Liz Truss referred to the personal inspiration that she had gained from Her Majesty the Queen, and reflecting on the task that she has politically ahead of her, and Liz Truss particularly highlighting, as we all are, her devotion to duty. And just taking in some of the cheers outside Buckingham Palace here, but just to single out one of the phrases that the Prime Minister used. The Queen Elizabeth was the rock on which modern Britain is built. And given the enormity of the change that the United Kingdom has witnessed over those 70 years, that couldn't be more apt. I'll continue with some more of those statements, those tributes, in a moment or two, but it's just worth me. I'm not sure if you can hear on our microphones some of the impromptu cheers and chants and songs which people are breaking into outside Buckingham Palace. They're all pretty solemn, and of course our spirits are all dampened anyway, but there is an element of joy, of celebration, of a life well lived, of service well given. And every now and again it just takes one person or a group of people respectfully to break out into, well, every now and again, a chorus of God Save the Queen. Of course, that national anthem will have to change, that crucial word. And long live the King, because that is the way it works. That is the way it has worked. The sadness of Prince Charles is now being translated. Well, that sadness remains, of course it does. His mother has just passed away, but it now is the duty of King Charles III, who's spending the remainder of the evening at Balmoral alongside his family. They managed to be with the Queen in her final hours. He'll spend the rest of the evening there in Balmoral before travelling down here to London to assume his royal duties. Good evening, you're watching Sky News on a momentous day for the nation. Her Majesty the Queen passed away at Balmoral this afternoon, just 2 days after she appointed the new Prime Minister, her 15th Prime Minister.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
A sombre evening for the country and indeed the world as the monarch's death is marked at the royal palaces. The royal family together to support the Queen in her final hours, flying to Scotland to be with her. And a nation in shock and mourning, unbelieving of the news of the death of the woman who has reigned over all of our lives. Good evening. It's a moment unlike any other in the last 70 years. The passing of a monarch unlike any other. Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, died this afternoon at the age of 96. It was at her beloved home, the Palace of Balmoral, and was, Buckingham Palace said, peaceful. Her son is now King Charles III, and he said tonight that his mother's death would be felt throughout the Commonwealth. Well, we'll hear the tributes to Her Majesty tonight, so many of those, and look back at her long and simply quite incredible life. Well, with our first report tonight, Jason Farrell reports on the day the Queen died, and that marked the end of an era.
At some point today, nearly everyone will have stopped what they were doing and absorbed the news. A notice was placed at Buckingham Palace. Flags were lowered. Our longest-serving monarch is gone. Only on Tuesday did she look robust, appointing the 15th Prime Minister to serve during her reign. In a statement, His Majesty the King said, "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held."
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain. and that spirit will endure.
Today we mourn the passing of a remarkable sovereign. It is a deep private loss for the royal family, and our first thoughts are with them at this time. The nation shares in their grief.
Throughout the day, small unsettling indicators emerged, notes being passed around the Commons. Something was up.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Doctors had expressed concern over the Queen's condition. Charles had cancelled an engagement. Then news that all senior members of the family were heading to Balmoral. And the grim look on faces as Prince William drove his uncles Andrew and Edward through the gates. Finally, a simple statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
For more than 70 years, Queen Elizabeth has been the great constant in our national life. She has inspired us, on occasion comforted us, and always personified values we hold dear.
The United Kingdom now enters a period of national mourning as we reflect on a Queen who kept her promise and dedicated her life to duty. Jason Farrell, Sky News, Balmoral.
Well, our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, is here with me at Buckingham Palace. And Rhiannon, as we look at those respectful crowds paying their tributes, their respects to the Queen, just give me your reflections on this most momentous of days.
I think when you watched the end of Jason's report there and you saw that final photograph that we saw of the Queen only from Tuesday, only 2 days ago, where at 96 years old she was still determined to be carrying out what was a key constitutional role. And yes, adjustments had to be made so that she was able to say farewell to her 14th Prime Minister and then welcome her 15th. But she knew that she wanted to be seen to be carrying out that duty. And I think that is why, for so many people, it's going to come as such a shock, this news this evening. And it was hugely unusual that the palace would decide to tell us that the medical staff were concerned about her, that the family were travelling there. And I think it was at that moment...
Is that where the alarm bells started ringing for you?
For me, I'd never had a statement like that from the palace. They're so private about medical matters. And at that moment, I thought, we have turned a corner here. And of course, over the last 12 months, we've spoken about it, haven't we? The mobility problems that the Queen's had. And I think for so long, people have been so used to her just being able to get on with the job. And in that speech she made when she was 21, she said no matter how long or short her life was going to be, it was going to be committed to serving her country and the Commonwealth. But also, now we move into a new phase, don't we? We now have a new king, and also we're going to see him having to take on her constitutional duties, but also, along with his other siblings, mourn her death up in Balmoral.
A lot we have to absorb. Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed, our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills. Well, I'm joined now by the former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, who was, of course, if I'm correct, Her Majesty the Queen's 9th Prime Minister. Sir John, your reflections on this day?
Well, I think it's a very sad day. We all realised that one day it would come, and we all hoped that it would be far distant rather than near to us. So I think it is an extremely sad day, and I think there will be many tears shed at the loss of Her Majesty.
Sir John, we know you can't share with us what passed between you in terms of the conversations, the regular conversations you held with Her Majesty in those meetings as Prime Minister. But we've been told it was her depth of knowledge and her empathy and her understanding that partly marked her out.
Well, it certainly did, but not only that. There was a great deal of wisdom and knowledge as well. There were several things that were very striking when you first entered into those meetings with Her Majesty. Firstly, they were very informal. The only two people in the room were Her Majesty the Queen and yourself, and a supporting galaxy of corgis who usually happen to be there, but absolutely no one else. And it was remarkably informal. One sat there and we talked, and there was nothing off the agenda. Everything was there that might be raised either by Her Majesty or by the Prime Minister. One reported what was going on, what was anticipated to happen in the future, what your thoughts were about what was happening and how you felt you were going to handle it. And the Queen would ask questions and she would comment. And she would refer to occasions in the past where she had seen similar events. And that was extraordinarily useful. Her historic memory for what had happened under past Prime Ministers was extraordinary. And a far longer historic memory than your civil service advisors. So that was often extremely helpful. And when it came to foreign affairs, there was almost no part of the world the Queen hadn't visited. And in many cases, she would remember not just the meetings she might have had with the current heads of government, but in many countries, their forebears had also been heads of government and the Queen had known them as well. So there was a great wealth of knowledge that was waiting to be tapped, and it just emerged during the conversations. They were extraordinarily useful. And of the many meetings you had in the week as Prime Minister, the hour plus that you usually spent with the Queen was among the most valuable.
And so, John, was that quite daunting? One can imagine the initial phases, perhaps, of your premiership. With that depth of knowledge, even just in our own country, when she could quote meetings with titans like Churchill to Macmillan, and the presidential side, the Eisenhowers, the Kennedys.
Well, it could easily have been made daunting, but it wasn't because of the manner in which the Queen approached it. It was very informal, it was very friendly, it wasn't confrontational. So it became very comfortable. Of course, you were always conscious you were speaking to the monarch, and a certain degree of total respect was due. But the meetings themselves were entirely informal. It might have been as though one was sitting at a table with you, discussing current political events in a casual and relaxed fashion. And of course, one discussed not only the politics of things, not only the government aspect, that the Queen would always have been interested in talking about what its impact was going to be on people in her nation. How would things impact upon someone who lived in Wigan or Seal or wherever it may be, anywhere across the United Kingdom? The personal aspect, the personal impact of policy upon people was always something that was in her mind. And that was amazingly refreshing. And at first you were quite astonished at the extent and depth of understanding that the monarch had about the lives that perfectly everyday people lived.
And they were turbulent times 30 years ago. Let's talk about, for the nation, on the political side. Of course, we had our economic troubles, perhaps some parallels with where we are now in 2022. And of course, let's not forget, there was a violent conflict taking place within the United Kingdom, that peace process that you started to negotiate. And Her Majesty the Queen, kind of symbol of stability amongst all that.
Her Majesty was a unifier. She was extraordinarily interested in the peace process and how the peace process was developing and how far we thought it would go and who we could bring in to help, who were the people who were actually standing in the way, what were the problems that existed, how did we think we could overcome it, did we think a solution was possible, how long would it take. All those were the sort of matters that we would have discussed. But her interest in ending the divisions, indeed the hatreds, and the problems that existed in Northern Ireland, her interest in seeing that solved was remarkable. And one of the regrets I think I have in my public life was that we weren't able to finish that. It was very ably finished by my successor, Tony Blair, and his advisors afterwards, and I warmly commend them for having done that and brought about the final agreement. And I think if I had a regret, it's that I didn't finish it. And if I had a second regret, it would be that when the Queen made her remarkable visit to Ireland a few years afterwards, that I was out of government and no longer there. But her interest in that was total.
And just while we're on that, Sir John, you mentioned that visit to Northern Ireland, that remarkable scene, symbol of forgiveness, when she shook Martin McGuinness's hand, former head of the IRA that had murdered Dickie Mountbatten.
It was a remarkable moment of forgiveness. It was a remarkable act of stateswomanship, I should say. And it took a remarkable woman to do it. But it was necessary. She knew it would help, and she was prepared to do it. I have absolutely no doubt that she was entirely happy to make that visit and to make the gestures that were necessary to seal the work that was coming towards fruition. And it was very valuable. She was, as I said, a unifier. That was her natural instinct. Her natural instinct was not to create division, but to bring people together. And whether that was bringing people together within Northern Ireland or bringing the component parts of the United Kingdom together when they had disputes, her principle was the same. Unity is far better than division.
And Sir John, then those difficult years for the royal family, for the monarchy itself, from the annus horribilis we heard her referring to in her Christmas address, the destruction of Windsor Castle, the separation and divorce of Charles and Diana, and then ultimately the sad passing of the Princess of Wales. Such difficult times.
They were very difficult times in the 90s. I mean, the annus horribilis and the fire at Windsor in 1992, I remember very plainly indeed. And the Queen in times of difficulties is stoic. She doesn't panic. She doesn't go into her shell. She puts her head down. She realizes there are difficult things you have to live through. You put your head down, you plow ahead, and eventually you will come out the other side. It's a great gift, that stoicism, and it is a gift that she learned. And she understands that you will come out of it. Horrible things have happened to people before, and they do survive them. They do come out the other side. And that was something she fully understood. Whatever happened, the daffodils will come up next spring, and so let us get on with life. It was a very profound way to approach many of these problems.
What a great way to end our conversation. What a memory to take with us. Sir John, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Sir John Major,
it's a great pleasure.
The former Prime Minister, some of his memories of Her Majesty the Queen. Well, let's talk now about the current Prime Minister, our political correspondent. It's not him. Joe Pike is in Downing Street. But, Joe, we heard earlier from Liz Truss.
We did, Dermot. We also now know that she was informed of the Queen's death by the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case at around 4:30 this afternoon, so 2 hours before the official announcement from the palace, and about 2.5 hours before she gave the speech here outside the door of Downing Street. We understand she wrote that speech herself. We also know that after speaking to the cameras, she had a conversation with the King. We also know that a meeting is taking place, an operational meeting right now. It started about 20 minutes ago at 9 p.m. It is a meeting to discuss what happens next, led by the Prime Minister. We understand the Defence Secretary, Home Secretary will also be attending that, operational police leads, as well as some representatives from the royal household. But speaking to sources within Downing Street, they're very keen to defer to the palace at this stage for announcements on this period of mourning, 10 days of mourning we are expecting. That speech for Liz Truss was an almighty test very early on, 2 days into her premiership, 2 days after she was appointed by Her Majesty the Queen at Balmoral. A very important statement to make, partly to reflect the shock, the devastation, 2 words Liz Truss used of this news, but also to expand on the Queen's legacy. She also, importantly, was the first person in public to speak of, to describe, to vocalise the transition that is now taking place, to talk of the King. Liz Truss said, "Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III." Also, Dermot, she ended that speech by saying, "God save the King."
hard to get used to. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Joe Pike, live for us in Downing Street. Well, let's cross to Northern Ireland now. Our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, is at the official royal residence there in Northern Ireland. It's Hillsborough Castle. And David, just take us through the mood there, the reaction there.
Well, it's a very wet evening in Northern Ireland, but that hasn't stopped the steady stream of people making their way to the gates of Hillsborough Castle, the official residence of the monarch here at Royal Hillsborough in County Down. Of course, Northern Ireland is a place where you will find the most loyal subjects and the least loyal subjects, but that's what makes this evening's statement from the First Minister-designate all the more significant. Michelle O'Neill, of course, is a nationalist, the deputy leader of Sinn Féin, but she has spoken about her profound regret at hearing this news. She extended her sympathy to members of the royal family and commented especially on how acutely she was aware of her unionist neighbours at this time of loss. She referred to the dedication and commitment the Queen had shown to the search for lasting peace in Northern Ireland, what Sir John Major was just referring to a few moments ago. And of course, Michelle O'Neill also commented on Her Majesty's courtesy and warmth on the occasions when they had met. Another person who had met with her, of course, many times was the MP for this constituency, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, and he gave us his reaction a short time ago.
I think tonight across Northern Ireland, in every county and town and village, there will be an outpouring of emotion. Households, families gathering together, yes, with fond memories of a wonderful woman who was such a constant in our lives, brought stability to our nation at times when there were challenges and difficulties.
I think for many people across this island, their thoughts tonight will be back 11 years ago when Her Majesty paid that historic state visit to the Republic of Ireland. It had taken nearly 100 years for a British monarch to set foot in an independent Ireland, and she famously greeted guests at the state banquet in Dublin with the words "Accardia, my friends." And regardless of the divisions across this island, the history of this island, I think she will be remembered here by most people as a friend of the peace process.
Truly was a remarkable visit. I was just discussing that with Sir John Major as well. David, thank you so much. David Blevins, our senior Ireland correspondent at Royal Hillsborough there. Well, for most of her life, the Queen travelled the world and kept a busy diary, to say the least, of engagements. Now, it was only into her 90s that she started to slow down. Her visits had to be changed. As we all saw, she struggled more and more with walking and moving, and she missed more events like last weekend's Braemar Games near Balmoral that she always loved to attend. Well, Ashish Joshi reports now on the Queen's deteriorating health in recent months.
It was here at Westminster Abbey in October last year that the Queen's growing struggle with mobility first became obvious. Her daughter Anne handing her mother a walking stick, which she would now need for support. She was 95 years old, and the years were finally catching up. And this deteriorating health would mean missing key engagements. In November, she was forced to pull out of attending the annual Remembrance Sunday service at the Cenotaph. And this blow came soon after the Queen was forced to spend a night at the King Edward VII Hospital. It was her first overnight stay in hospital for 8 years. By now, the monarch had been warned she needed to slow down her busy diary commitments.
It's been very clear all the way through her reign that she wants to do her best, and she's taken an oath that she has put first. So she's done incredibly well, and worked an awful lot longer than most of the people in this world. So well done.
In her 96 years, she has rarely been ill. She had surgery on her knees in 2003 and was back in hospital in 2013 after a bout of gastroenteritis. Even COVID did not seem to have a major impact on her health. The Queen caught the virus in February 2022. She told medics and bereaved families about the effect it had had on her.
It does leave one very tired and exhausted, doesn't it?
But there were other things that troubled her that the Queen would never share in public. Allegations surrounding her son Andrew, and a deepening family rift involving Harry and Meghan, which would undoubtedly have caused her much stress. But there is one major trauma that would have impacted the Queen's health like no other: the loss of her husband, Prince Philip, in April last year. This heartbreaking image of a woman separated from her life partner. It can only hint at the all-consuming grief.
The Queen's gone through a really major life event, losing a life partner, and it's not uncommon that we hear stories that people who have undergone such a loss really find the following years really very difficult. And obviously grief has many effects, doesn't it, on our psychology, but also maybe on other physiological aspects like immune system. It might also change behavior, which then leads to changes in muscle strength and ability to, again, cope with those activities of daily living. So I guess there is going to be an effect of losing a life partner.
Slowly, showing the resilience that had endeared her to millions, the Queen returned to public life, albeit in a much more limited way. Her passions kept her going, indulging her love of horses in Windsor and using a buggy to tour the Chelsea Flower Show. These shorter engagements were just about manageable. By June, however, the Queen was forced to limit her attendances at her own Jubilee celebrations. A month afterwards, she undertook what would be one of her last public engagements, the opening of a hospice in Windsor. The decline in the Queen's health was slow and not easily noticeable. Just a few days ago, she received the new Prime Minister. 48 hours later, her family announced her death.
What happens with somebody who is in their 90s or is frail is that even a small thing can make a big difference. Something that perhaps wouldn't have affected a younger person with much more reserve capacity can really make a big difference and cause someone to then become really very unwell.
A long, happy reign, a lifetime devoted to her family and her subjects. The Queen's 96 years were hardly troubled by ill health, and that will bring some small comfort to her grieving family. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, good evening from Balmoral, where in the last hour or two people have been coming to lay flowers and to stand and to think about the monarch. For many of them, for the vast majority of them, of course, the only monarch they have known, but there are now quite a few flowers laying against the walls at the gates of Balmoral Castle, one of the Queen's favourite places to be. She always came here in the summer. She loved the peace of this place, she loved the countryside, and she just loved being here. And it is here tonight where her family have gathered, her 4 children, 2 of her grandchildren are here, Prince Harry and Prince William. Harry got here pretty late, around, I think it was about 7:45 this evening he arrived, but the others got here early. But tonight they are mourning and they are grieving. James Matthews, our Scotland correspondent, is with me. It is a very special place for the Queen, isn't it?
It is. She's been coming here since she was a child at the Balmoral estate. And I suppose when the family, who we watched here arriving, grim-faced, a family in grief, I suppose they will be reflecting on the comfort that she herself, perhaps the public, saw her, which was on Tuesday, when she appointed a new inside the drawing room of Balmoral Castle, was in good spirits, was in jovial mood when her press secretary and press photographer were introduced.
were detaining, of course, Liz Truss above Aberdeen Airport. So she was in good form, in a place where she felt comfortable, in a place where she liked, where she had known family gatherings, family holidays throughout her time. It was a secluded place where a mother, a grandmother, away from the pressure of public duty.
Well, I'm afraid we seem to have lost communications with James Matthews and Mark Austin in Balmoral. We'll try and re-establish those links in a moment or two. But let me tell you more about the immediate time after the announcement that the Queen had died. Thousands of people gathered outside the gates of Buckingham Palace here behind me, and thousands of them are still here, and I suspect will be here for many hours to come. And in keeping with tradition, a written notice, a simple written notice announcing the death was posted for them to see. A very short message to everyone who's lived under the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Well, Katie Spencer reports now from Buckingham Palace on a nation in shock and mourning.
A swirl of rumours had seen small numbers of people gather outside the gates. Then just before 6:30, confirmation. Silently, respectfully, numbers grew, trying to capture as best they could this day in history. The enormity of this moment, for some, a struggle to take in.
To see the flag behind you there, sort of, slowly lower, and it was just a sense of, both realisation, but also, I think, this united love, and I think it was an odd kind of surreal feeling there.
So it's a really emotional moment, and even if you're not born British, she represented the best values of the country that actually made me stay here.
I think there's been so many generations that have come through and just known her as this presence, even without being a political voice, just being this kind of stability and sort of more than just a figurehead. I think nation's grandmother is appropriate.
Outside of Windsor Castle, similar scenes. People wanting to mark this moment.
She's been part of my life forever, and she's not here. And you hope, but you appreciate that. Her age, it was expected at some point, but even when it happened, it's still a shock.
I'm absolutely shocked. I couldn't believe it, and I actually didn't think I would be upset, but I am, and I have no idea why. It's just I think she's just so in everyone's psyche now, so I'm not even a royalist, but I'm still really upset.
Her legacy is so prominent. When I think of Britain, when I was growing up, it's always been the Queen, the royal family, and just a beacon of stability.
As sunset, the sea of people building outside of Buckingham Palace. Umbrellas up, a little rain, not enough to put people off being here to mark this moment.
In amongst the crowds here, you get a very real sense of the shock and the loss many ordinary people who have been moved to come here are experiencing. And you find people here from all demographics and all generations.
Barriers brought in anticipation of the crowds to come. Many more expected here in the days ahead as the sun sets on the Elizabethan age. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, those were the scenes as you see in Katie Spencer's report outside Buckingham Palace in the daylight hours, and they're still like that right now. Thousands of people here paying their respects and sharing their memories with each other of Her Majesty the Queen. Our correspondent Dan Whitehead is in Cardiff tonight, and Dan, you can tell me about reaction in Wales.
Yeah, it is an evening of sombre reflection for the people of Wales as they remember Her Majesty and the strong connections, of course, which the Queen and the whole royal family hold with Wales. We have had a statement from Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. He has said that it is with great sadness that people of Wales mourn the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II throughout her long and exceptional life as our longest reigning monarch. Her Majesty has reigned over the United Kingdom and Commonwealth, firmly upholding the values and traditions of the British monarchy. The First Minister went on to say that we pay tribute to Her Majesty's dedication and selfless devotion. That is the statement from the First Minister on behalf of the people of Wales. Her Majesty last visited Wales back in October last year, where she gave a speech here at the Welsh Parliament, at the opening of Parliament here at the Senedd. And in that speech she said that it was a source of pleasure that her family had homes in Wales and experienced its very special sense of community. And of course tonight is a moment of reflection and remembrance of Her Majesty. It is also a moment to realise that now the head of state, King Charles III, Prince of Wales, of course, since 1969, when he was invested at Carnarvon Castle in the north of Wales by his mother, the late Queen. That, of course, will be a focus in the coming days and weeks for the people of Wales. But it is clear tonight that there is deep devotion and admiration to Her Majesty, and it is an evening of reflection and remembrance at her loss.
Dan, thanks so much for that. Dan Whitehead, live for us there in Cardiff. Well, there's no doubt about it. The world has changed. It's shifted immeasurably since Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne 70 years ago, and even more since her birth 96 years ago. Now, before her passing, some of those who knew her best, including her family, of course, have spoken about what made her quite so unique. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, looks back at the second Elizabethan era.
All those years of wisdom and compassion, we've been so lucky.
Her work ethic, her strong faith, her leadership, there wasn't anything Her Majesty couldn't do.
There was a courtesy and a humanity and a kindness that I'll remember forever.
Born in 1926, Princess Elizabeth wasn't expected to be Queen. Her destiny changed with the death of her grandfather and the abdication of her uncle. Her father was now king, and Elizabeth his heir. Her role for life was set, and her approach to it shaped by the Second World War.
The sort of keep calm, carry on philosophy was absolutely embedded in her, I think.
The princess became a member of the ATS.
Wartime also sparked the most important relationship of her life. Her marriage to Prince Philip was celebrated across the country. Soon, Prince Charles was born, followed by Princess Anne.
They're taking the places of the king and queen who would have gone but for His Majesty's illness.
But duty called. Her father was ill, and they had to take his place on a tour of the Commonwealth.
To the stunned heart of London and to the whole Commonwealth came the tragic news from Sandringham of the passing of a beloved sovereign, King George VI.
In a remote lodge in Kenya, Prince Philip told her the news. She was now queen. The following year came her coronation. Years later, she described how it felt.
In a way, I didn't have an apprenticeship. My father died much too young. It was all a very sudden kind of taking on and making the best job you can.
From the very start, she felt she had to get out and connect with the public.
The Queen and Duke now took their places.
Through thousands of engagements and inventing the walkabout.
Whether you were the lollipop lady or you know, you were a president or a prime minister of a nation, people become nervous. And it was wonderful to see how Her Majesty would put them at ease.
With constitutional responsibilities and weekly audiences with her prime ministers.
Virtually alone
of all the people that you knew anything that you said to us stayed within the room.
Do we think that this is a good idea? Do we not know what it's about?
She was a wonderful boss. We used to put up a red box every evening, and we knew that she would have been through them and it would be back on our desk the next morning at 8 o'clock.
The principle of listening to what she thought Churchill might have done in similar conditions or circumstances to what I found myself in. It was those sort of conversations that I learned a huge amount from and will treasure forever.
As head of the Commonwealth and Queen of other realms, she travelled more than any other head of state, always conducting her own powerful form of soft diplomacy.
She can have a personal conversation which, helps to move on some really quite difficult and tricky political moments.
Uchtiroin, Argus, Acoida.
The first British monarch to visit the Republic of Ireland in 100 years. She was a figurehead of unity and stability.
She never wavered from duty or service. And in uncertain times, people need anchors. We've lost one of our most important anchors.
I'm very glad to have been able to join you today.
Often, she adapted the way that she worked, such as during the coronavirus pandemic, to reach out, set an example, and rally the nation with messages of resilience.
We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Her Majesty is the warrior queen. She has done it. She's been there. Her Majesty dressed the nation. It's the empathy. We're all in this together, but it's going to be okay.
Behind the formality was an utterly devoted wife and mother.
The family is very close together, and we do enjoy spending time. And she's always made time all the way through her life, and yes, there have been those particular moments of the year when that very much comes first.
Whenever we had the family moments and we met up, she'd be very keen on watching what the children were up to, and I think there were moments when she loved the noise and running around the house. It kind of brought the house to life, and it kind of made the real family atmosphere.
We see this is strong enough to... Get off, get off. I want it.
While she was head of state, Philip was head of the family and a huge support.
Come around this side.
They were a couple with a different relationship than many people have. But he learnt to live with that. It's difficult to be a monarch with the degree of responsibility that you have without a very good partnership to back you up.
In 2021, she said goodbye to her beloved husband and dedicated consort.
What you see is courage, but also a complete lack of self-pity. She feels grief, but as she said on one occasion, it's not about me.
In a less deferential world, they did weather more difficult times, especially in the 1990s, as her children got divorced and a fire wrecked Windsor Castle.
It has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
In 1997, Princess Diana died in a car crash. It was a low point for the royal family, as the crowds criticised them for staying in Scotland.
The Queen's life has been a continual process of shaping how you keep in touch with a world that's changing very fast, and she was always doing that.
In recent years, the Queen led the monarchy through more turmoil. She rarely showed emotion in public. Privately, she was known for her genuine warmth and kindness.
We were up shooting one day up in Balmoral, and the weather changed in the afternoon, so I took my raincoat, wrapped it round, I gave her my scarf and my gloves. And as I walked away, I cheekily took my flat shooting hat off and put it on top of her headscarf. 3 weeks later, she called me into her office, and she'd had this photograph of developed and put in a beautiful frame for me. And she said, I thought you'd like to keep this as a souvenir.
That's it. She was never happier than when she was with her dogs and watching her horses. And just sometimes we'd see a glimpse of her sense of humour.
I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here.
Oh.
For later.
As the Queen grew older, the whole country would come together to celebrate her milestone moments. She would go on to become Britain's longest reigning monarch.
Inevitably, a long life can pass by many milestones. My own is no exception.
And the first to mark a platinum jubilee. Her family increasingly expected to step in to support her. The Queen's remarkable reign and the stability it brought helping to secure the future of the monarchy as her family continued to grow. Throughout her life, honouring to the end the pledge she made at just 21.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Just some there of the remarkable life and times of Queen Elizabeth II, whose death has been announced today. And we're going to talk now about the succession. There is no gap in the British Constitution. King Charles III has now assumed his responsibilities. He's spending the evening in Balmoral, where his mother passed away earlier this afternoon, but will travel to London as King Charles tomorrow. Well, joining me now from Cambridge is the principal of Homerton College and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cambridge, Lord Simon Woolley. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Lord Woolley. And mentioning that, I still keep wanting to say Prince Charles, King Charles. He has been, of course, preparing for this role all his life.
Yes, he has. But first, may I offer my deepest condolences to the royal family and a nation. As has been said, we are a nation in shock, a nation in mourning. And, you know, reflecting on Her Majesty's life, particularly when I look back on the documentary that she spoke in recently, she said that service is sacrifice. And when you think of the decades of service and sacrifice, right up until 2 days ago, you see what a wonderful global role model she's been. I mean, ever since this announcement, my phone's been alight with calls actually from around the world. I just received a call from Reverend Al Sharpton, Reverend Jesse Jackson, calls from Italy and Kenya, all offering their condolences to our great leader who has passed. And of course, as you said, passed on to our new king. I want to say Prince Charles, but it's King Charles III, who I'm sure, like many people, he will make a great leader and a great king who's been waiting for this moment to take his place in our history.
Lord Woolley, just as you mentioned, it would be really interesting for you to tell us a little bit about Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and so many others, about how Her Majesty formed those connections, why she would mean so much to them.
You know, it's interesting because both characters are deeply political, and yet they've viewed our Queen beyond politics. The glue that's kept our nation together And it doesn't surprise me one bit that I should receive calls from them offering the black community, Black Britain, and the whole nation condolences from key figures such as those. And again, I think this will come around the world because she was revered, revered as a statesperson, revered as a model, Dermot, of integrity, of quiet leadership for him, for others, for me to aspire to. And you know, as we mourn, as we are deeply, deeply saddened, we can be immensely proud, actually, of this incredible servant to our nation who showed us what service should be about.
And let's talk about Charles, King Charles.
Yeah.
That dignity and quiet leadership that you describe by his mother, from his mother, is that something in his own way that he will continue?
I think so. I think he'll do it in his own way. I mean, there's lots been said about the king, but I've been fortunate to work with him, to collaborate with him. And there's not many people I know on this planet who loves this nation more than King Charles. And his desire to bring people together, to confront issues like climate change and inequality is second to none. And I'm pretty sure that the nation, after mourning, will gather around the new king and saying that we're with you, that we support you in your new era, being the sensitive man and the lover of our nation that he is.
And Lord Woolley, I know you have roots in Barbados, and that was quite a remarkable visit that then Prince Charles made to Barbados, as it had voted to leave the Commonwealth and become a republic. And for him to visit, for him to witness, was quite something.
It really was something, and I was very privileged to join him during the celebrations. And what he did was set a tone across the Commonwealth, that we belong to the family, which is the Commonwealth. But he gave his blessing that we should find our own voice. I'm British, but I'm also Barbadian. And I thought it was true leadership, and it was humble, and it was heartfelt. And I remember being with him and the Prime Minister, Mia Motley. And when we was on a talk during the archives, she leant into me and she said to me, Simon, looking at the Prince, you have a good man. You have a good man there, and I'm proud to be his friend. And I think that wherever he went around the globe, particularly those that were privy enough to have those conversations, that you knew that this was a man who, like his mother, leaned into the service, the national service that is demanded from such a role, but did it in a way, Dermot, that you sensed his whole being, his whole sense of who he was, demanded that level of integrity. For me, I've been privy enough. You see a picture at the back there in my illustrious office here, and it's me being knighted by Her Majesty The Queen. And it was one of the most proudest days of my life. I took my son with me, and we had a wonderful day. So I like hundreds, if not thousands, of people have had their special moment with Her Majesty The Queen. And now we have a new era. We have a new king, King Charles. And I've been lucky to know him. He will be a good king, a strong king, and one that loves his nation, to come together to be the best that we can be. Today, tomorrow, for a number of days, we'll be mourning. We've never known anything like this. All we've known, the vast majority of our citizens, is that Queen Elizabeth. We've never known anything different. So it's new for us, and we are anxious, but unsaddened by her loss, because she's been been the glue. But I'm pleased. I'm pleased for King Charles to take the throne, to be the head of the Commonwealth and our nation. And that's what life is. You know, you live your life. Her Majesty's had a full and wonderful life and given pleasure, given leadership to millions of people. And I hope that King Charles will follow gloriously in her footsteps.
Lord Woolley, thank you so much for putting it all in context for us, the transition between the past and the future. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, around the world, tributes are being paid to Her Majesty the Queen. In the United States, of course, Joe Biden has made a statement. Our US correspondent, Mark Stone, there is outside the White House. Tell us what the president had to say, Mark.
Dermot, the president at some point this afternoon or this evening will head to the British Embassy here in the United States, where he will sign a book of condolence. He's also due to speak about the passing of Queen Elizabeth, but he has also already released a statement, and I'll read a bit of it to you. He said, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was more than a monarch. She defined an era. Queen Elizabeth II was a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our relationship special. He went on to say, all told, she met 14 American presidents. She helped Americans to commemorate both the anniversary of the founding of Jamestown and the bicentennial of our independence. And she stood in solidarity with the United States during our darkest days after 9/11, when she poignantly reminded us that grief is the price we pay for love. President Joe Biden's personal statement reflecting the loss of Her Majesty the Queen.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone live for us there in Washington, D.C. Well, I'm joined now by the royal historian, Tessa Dunlop. And Tessa, as a historian, we are witnessing historic scenes, pouring with rain. The crowds are remaining undiminished. They know what has happened and they know just how significant it is.
Yeah, and it's also very poignant, really, that while we gather around what's perceived to be the epicentre of British royalty, Buckingham Palace, the Queen died in Balmoral. She once famously said of Balmoral, it's a place one looks forward to very much. It has an atmosphere all of its own, and I don't think we can underestimate just how fitting it is. That's where she spent her last few days. You know, this is the first monarch to have died in Scotland since James V, the Scottish Stuart, in 1542. The Queen, of course, much more a Stuart and a Bruce, directly descended from Mary, Queen of Scots, than she ever was a Tudor up the Henry VIII, Elizabeth I line, and somebody who passionately believed in the United Kingdom, and also on an emotional level. That was really a home, an emotional home for her. It was where she spent the first part of the Second World War, as well as a large part of her childhood beforehand. It was where Philip first mooted the idea of getting married in the summer of 1946, before the press got hold of it. It was where she spent the best bit, the bit where the press didn't intrude, of our honeymoon in Burke Hall. You know, there's so much that's personal and good and private about Balmoral, and there's also something wonderfully symbolic about our canny monarch spending her last few days there and then coming down through the country, lying in state in Scotland first. You know, really a symbol of a united country. And then our new king, of course, not a man in the first flush of youth, very like, in fact, Edward VII, who turned out to be a good king, but famously said, it's come too late.
But just on the palaces, I mean, obviously this is the symbol, centrepiece, flag, of course, all important, that flagpole with the Union flag flying at half-mast.
She wasn't keen on it, though, as a home.
I was going to ask you that. She preferred Balmoral, she preferred Scotland, she preferred Burke.
And actually, when the king died, and that was much more of a shock in many ways than the Queen dying, given that she's 96, there was an air of expectation, even though it is shocking because she's been with us so long. Her father, just 56, the press very much covered up his illness. He'd done a full day of shooting. When Churchill heard, he said, bad news, it's the worst. But Churchill insisted that the Edinburghs, as they were then, Philip and Elizabeth, left Clarence House. Philip didn't want to. and nor did Elizabeth, because she liked to please Philip, and insisted that the monarch came and lived with her young family here in Buckingham Palace.
Fantastic, thank you very much indeed. And it's quite a thought to conjure with mentioning her first Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. Then the Prime Minister was old, the monarch was young. Well, and 70 years later, roles reversed just 2 days ago, wasn't it?
Absolutely extraordinary. And he actually said, but she's just a child, and then very quickly talked of her extraordinary, astonishing authority and reflectiveness in someone who's just an infant. He said, a reminder of just how young she was. And of course, Charles now in his 74th year. We need to wish our king all the best. He's got quite a job in front of him the next few days.
Well, that is the point that Lord Woolley was making. A lot of it formality, a lot of it set in stone, a lot of it pre-planned, a lot of it procedure that has been long discussed.
But if you think there was Bertie, or Edward VII as he became, saying, oh, it's come too late, he was 59. Prince Charles is in his 74th year. He will, of course, be visiting all 4 nations in Britain, and that's before we talk about the Commonwealth.
Tessa, for the time being, thank you very, very much. Good evening, you're watching Sky News on a momentous day for the nation.
Her Majesty the Queen has died after 70 years on the throne. King Charles III is now the monarch. The Queen passed away at Balmoral this afternoon, just 2 days after she appointed the new Prime Minister.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
A sombre evening for the country and the world as the monarch's death is marked at the royal palaces. The royal family together to support the Queen in her final hours, flying to Scotland to be with her. A nation in shock, unbelieving of the news of the death of the woman who has reigned over all of us for all our lives. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's historic front pages a bit later on in our press briefing. Good evening. Well, it's a moment like no other in the past 70 years. The passing of a monarch like no other. Her Majesty the Queen died this afternoon at the age of 96. It was at her beloved Balmoral and was, Buckingham Palace said, peaceful. Her son is now King Charles III, and he said tonight that his mother's death would be felt throughout the country, the Commonwealth, and the entire world. Well, we'll hear the tributes to Her Majesty tonight and look back at her long and incredible life. With our first report tonight, Jason Farrell reports on the day that the Queen died, that marked the end of an era.
At some point today, nearly everyone will have stopped what they were doing and absorbed the news. A notice was placed at Buckingham Palace. Flags were lowered. Our longest-serving monarch is gone. Only on Tuesday did she look robust, appointing the 15th Prime Minister to serve during her reign. In a statement, His Majesty the King said, "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held."
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure.
Today we mourn the passing of a remarkable sovereign. It is a deep private loss for the royal family, and our first thoughts are with them at this time. The nation shares in their grief.
Throughout the day, small unsettling indicators emerged, notes being passed around the Commons. Something was up.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Doctors had expressed concern over the Queen's condition. Charles had cancelled an engagement. Then news that all senior members of the family were heading to Balmoral. And the grim look on faces as Prince William drove his uncles Andrew and Edward through the gates. Finally, a simple statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
Scotland loved, respected and admired her. And by all accounts, Her Majesty was really happier than when she was here in Scotland at her beloved Balmoral, a fact I have been privileged to observe personally. I hope it will be a source of comfort to her family that she spent her final days in a place that she loved so much.
The United Kingdom now enters a period of national mourning as we reflect on a Queen who kept her promise and dedicated her life to duty. Jason Farrell, Sky News, Balmoral.
Our oil correspondent Rhiannon Mills is here with me at Buckingham Palace, where huge crowds have gathered. They remain here. Rhiannon, as we drink in those scenes, your thoughts?
And isn't it amazing that despite the rain,
Thanks for watching. Bye.